Welcome to my TT Wine Explorer podcast. I'm Tania Tomaszewska. This podcast is about my adventure through the deep and wide world of wine. It's a discussion through my lens as an everyday wine enthusiast turned cork dork and a reformed banking lawyer turned wine industry professional. For this episode, we're going to head south of the Canadian border where I'm based here in Vancouver, British Columbia. Today we're off to Northern California, but we're not going to check out Californian wines. We're going to follow the migration of Canadian wines into the United States. My guest today is Vijay Gandhi, founder of Kascadia Wine Merchants, which is based south of San Francisco. Kascadia Wine Merchants imports, distributes, and sells Canadian wines to the United States markets. I think that I first met Vijay in the virtual world through Instagram or Google. I was trying to figure out how to send holiday gifts of British Columbian wine to friends of mine who live in the US. After a short online search, Kascadia popped up. Looking back on things now, this would have been the early days when Vijay was starting to build her business. And there really weren't many other options out there for what I was looking for. So we connected online, and Vijay then helped not only me, but also some of my other clients who wanted to gift Canadian wines to their US-based recipients. So this is a practical example of how and why a new business is started to help fix a problem or fill a gap in the market. Like me, Vijay is Canadian, has developed a bug for sharing the good stuff about wine, and is carving a niche for herself in the wine world. I hope that you enjoy my discussion today with Vijay Gandhi. Let's fly. Hi, Vijay. Welcome to my TT Wine Explorer podcast. Thank you so much for joining as my guest today.
Hi, Tania. It's my pleasure.
So before we get into the nuts and bolts of your wine business and how you introduce Canadian wines to the US market, I'd like to chat a little bit about how this all started for you. You're originally from Vancouver, BC, and you now live in Northern California. Since moving to the US, you've started a new chapter in a new home, you've started a family, and you've built a brand new wine business from scratch. And you've done this completely in a new sector for you. Can you tell us a bit about your story? How did you get the bug to start this business? What prompted it?
That's a great question. And I've told the long version of it, and I can kind of break it down. Long story short, I've been living in Northern California now for 10 years. And I think I've always had a bit of an entrepreneurial spirit. I'm very interested in trade, economics, entrepreneurship. And coming from Vancouver, British Columbia, as usual, we go out to the Okanagan to go wine tasting. I think the Fraser Valley is still quite new. It's still building its portfolio, I feel like, but Okanagan's kind of been strong and steady for 20, 30, 40 years. So we would frequent Okanagan, and if we weren't hanging out at the lake or boating all day, we were wine tasting after the age of 21 or 19 or whatever it was. And when I moved to California, always being a foodie, and I'd worked corporate for so long. So corporate allows you this really wonderful experience of dining in downtown Vancouver. If you work anywhere on Burrard Street, you've had lunch at a really nice restaurant, right, with your colleagues. So great food, great wine was not a shock to me. So when I moved to Northern California, my husband and I, we share that in common. We love food and wine and art culture. And but what surprised me most was I was not seeing Canadian wine on the menus. And I think a natural problem solver, I started asking questions about it. And also, I think one day it just kind of clicked to me. I said, well, why don't I just touch base with some of my friends that I'd met, over my corporate years, and just find out if any of the trade folks know about Canadian wine in the US, because I really, like yourself, I couldn't find it anywhere, not even online. And then with some marketing research, I reached out to a New York-based market research company, and it was important to me to gather some data and understand the audience here, because like you said, I wasn't American. I grew up in Canada. I knew the demographic there, geographic, it's different when you move to a brand new country and you don't know a soul and you haven't worked there and you haven't lived life. So I was really heavily relying on data and analysis. And it turns out that California is the largest wine producer, as well as in consumption. And I'm sure some of the other states are growing now, but wine culture is very affluent here. And so when I look at a community like that, it's just like if you work you were raised in Montana or Alberta. Like we're like aware of like the Calgary Stampede and the farms and but then if you grew up in wine country, you're probably tasted wine at 19, 20, 21, or you're just more affluent to that. So that told me, okay, coincidentally, I live in the Bay Area and Napa's right here. This must be a wine educated demographic. And so when you look at from that perspective, it's kind of more of an open door and a warm hug and come on in. We want to try your new wines. Oh, you're from Canada? That's amazing. Never tried it. Let's try it. So that's kind of how it played out, because I was approached by folks every once in a while, and a lot of business owners go through this. Are you crazy? You want to do that? Oh, that's not going to work.
I've heard that a lot.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, crazy, I guess, because you weren't a known quantity and Canadian wines weren't really a known quantity, and you're doing it in, one of the powerhouses of global wine production in California, in American wine headquarters. So you got across a lot of information quickly. I didn't know that I'd forgotten that you had engaged a marketing firm. So you really put yourself through the paces quickly, and you obviously identified a gap. So from that, it sounds as though you started to build a business. I understand that the main components of your business are, you're an online retailer, you're a distributor and an importer. I know that's a lot at once. I know that the framework in the United States is different than ours here in Canada. Do I have this right in terms of the component of your business? And, did you start with one, or what was the process to get to where you're at now in terms of your framework?
I started with all three licensing right off the bat and permits, because I wanted the website we curated to serve as a platform for Canadian producers to showcase their Canadian wines in the US. My vision started with a long-term vision. It wasn't just like, hey, I want to open up an online retail shop and just have the ease of doing that. No, I was really looking at like, what's a great export ratio? Wouldn't it be amazing if Canada was able to bridge a gap of, at a high level? So because we only share one border with the US. And the more research I did, and then the research doesn't just take place on the US side about stats on, what the consumption looks like, how much is being imported. It's also about why were the previous attempts to push Canadian wine into the US? Why did it fall short? Where did we fall short in the past? And I think anyone that's tried it, it's an amazing passion to pursue. It's a lot of hard work. And pricing kept coming up, that the prices were too high once it crossed the border. So that really kind of made me look at, well, what are some ways we can cut our overhead, bring the costs down? And so what happens is when you import a bottle of wine into the US through an importer, before that importer, showcases it to a distributor, it's marked up 40%. And then you look at what the distributor charges before they sell it to a retailer. And then, how much more money goes into that. But by the time you get to the retail price for the consumer, I mean, it's substantial. And how can you convince someone that an amazing bottle from Canada that sells for $25 there is worth $55 here in the US, or $50? And I just don't think that's fair to the consumer. And I don't think it's fair to producers who are kind of falling short by not marketing themselves with a better strategy. So by allocating and, having these licenses and permits, I was able to get rid of some of the, just marking up. Instead, I'm kind of having a better margin here for Canadian retailers in the US.
So you're touching on so many interesting points right now on the building of the business and the building of a business that relates to wine and wine crossing a border where there are different regulatory aspects, different taxation points, different pricing. You have to navigate a lot on both sides of the border in terms of expectations. So I'm going to get to the pricing bit perhaps a little bit later, but this is a related issue, I suppose. Let's call it about market differentiation and also what's enticing. So, I'm often asked by my American friends why they don't see a lot of Canadian wines in their shops, on their wine lists. People usually know about ice wine, but that's about it. I mean, there is more now, but until recently it was like, what? You make more than ice wine? There are a lot of reasons why Canadian wines haven't gone out in large volumes internationally. I mean, some of the key factors, as are that, our production volumes here are very, very small. I mean, minuscule in the global wine context. And right now, the majority of our wines, and I'll focus on British Columbia wines in the Canadian context right now, but obviously there's wine from a lot of other provinces in Canada. Most of our wine that we make in BC, we consume domestically. So there isn't really much left to go abroad, not right now anyway. If we could free more of our grapes and get more bottles to be able to come your way, let's talk about demand and interest. Are you seeing a trend of more consumers where you're based wanting to explore more things from outside of California, outside of the US? Is it the wine or the story that's enticing? Like, what is it that you think can be the hook to get people to try something that's very, very different in their market?
So, the consumer habits have been changing. So even though we're based in California and it's such a big wine growing region and things like that, they are seeking wines from outside the country. And so, sometimes I'll go to a California restaurant and I'll just see California wines on there. But most of the restaurants do carry an international portfolio. So I think the way we positioned the business was I don't know if everyone agrees with calling it a boutique business, but kind of asserting ourselves right off the beginning, at the beginning to say, hey, we buy small production, high quality wines from Canada, and we showcase some of the best brands. And so it is about the story. It's about the wine quality. And, I really had to stick my neck out in the beginning and host events. Whether they were in person and mostly in person, and knock on the right doors, network. It was really, Tanya, it was from scratch.
Yeah. And grassroots. Yes. Word of mouth, grassroots.
Yes, exactly. Reaching out to folks within your own network, attending events so you can build out your network, shaking hands with people who are like-minded in the industry or even outside your industry. And then it's really amazing to realize there's so many Canadians living in the US. And so that was also one of our target audiences, right? Because now you're bringing a little piece of something they loved from back home here. And it kind of feels like a hug in a bottle.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's an interesting point because, yes, there are a lot of Canadians living in the US. So I imagine that a really strong marketing channel for you is to find them and say, hey, you can get some of your wines from home here through our online shop or through us. That's interesting though. So Canadians might know what to expect from a Canadian wine. In terms of consumer preferences, in general terms, I mean, I understand that you sell into different states within the United States. Have you observed a difference in flavor profiles between different consumers, like on a state base or not necessarily, big reds, more fruit forward, are people looking for lower alcohol wine, more European style? This is in the context of a myriad of offerings in the United States. And does that affect the types of Canadian wines that you select to bring in, like in terms of the flavor profiles that you're observing in your market in the United States?
Absolutely. Hands-on. And when we looked at the first 5 years of sales and we looked at what was selling, it's really interesting because, for example, on the East Coast, this is actually a conversation I had with another group. On the East Coast, we would notice more of our ice wines making it out to online retail sales. Whereas on the West Coast, we get a little bit more of like our, warm climate. Like we get in California, the Sauvignon Blancs, the Pinot Gris, the Pinot Noirs, and some of the things that they're more familiar with, like, like a red blend. But on the East Coast, they're more open to purchasing a sweeter white wine, a deeper red, and some of the, big Syrahs or the really heated, like in Texas, for example, the Texans are purchasing our biggest reds and our biggest Syrahs. So I think it does kind of have to do with flavor profile. And it's so interesting. It made me wonder one day, are folks on the East Coast drinking ice wine because at some point they familiarize themselves with the Finger Lakes or have gone up to the Niagara Peninsula. And how oddly is it like a coincidence that the folks on the West Coast are drinking wines that are similar to what's being served up in, Oregon, Washington, British Columbia, for example. British Columbia is part of the Pacific Northwest. So I think it's a little geographical as well. And that's the only thing that really, when you look at the stats and you look at the marketing, that's really what shows up for me.
Well, that's a really interesting point. Texas, maybe, originally what goes with big reds with big steak. East Coast, I've seen that certainly in Canada. If you travel to some of our eastern cities, often, there's a lot of a European wine historically that's very popular, or the go-to. So, your reference to Pacific Northwest, this brings up to me the name Kascadia. So the term Kascadia, I know, and I usually think of it as, spelt with a C. And, as I understand it, we use that term often to refer to a geographical area, a borderless area, but that area takes in British Columbia, Washington State, Oregon, perhaps Northern California. And this kind of idea that we are all quite alike given geography. So your Kascadia is with a K. So what does that word mean for you? What are you looking to evoke? What, you've mentioned about let's turn our minds to North American wines. What are you saying here?
For me personally, it encompasses where I come from, the home I grew up in, and my new home that I've built. So, the Pacific Northwest is basically where the Cascade Mountain Range runs, right? It starts in British Columbia and it works all the way down to, I believe it's Northern California. And that's where we source most of our inventory. We do bring in, wine from Ontario and in some cases Quebec. We are going to start reaching out to Nova Scotia and a couple of other places. But this really does, my business has become my story. It's so personal. And I think passion, folks have said to me, gosh, you're so passionate about what you do. It's because I love what I do. And there's a lot of love that goes into every part of our company. Whether it's like our marketing campaigns, I think the more authentic you are in what you do, even when you started and you didn't know anything, and people kind of see you grow. People really watch your business grow. People watch you grow. And I've become a mother over the last 3 years. That changes things, right? And we've kind of now started to feel more comfortable in showcasing not just a wine company, but a lifestyle. It's a lifestyle. Wine tasting is wine tasting, purchasing wine, enjoying your wine. Even in our club, we now include recipe cards every quarter so that people feel like they're part of something just a little bit bigger than just like, oh, I purchased wine. It shows up every quarter. We have virtual tastings. We're going to start having pop-up events. But, and then our photo shoots have really changed. Our photo shoots used to be just about products. It's now, we've pivoted and positioned ourselves to showcase a lifestyle. So I have grown as an entrepreneur, as a woman, as a mother, and, Kascadia, it really does encompass where I come from. And I brought a little something of what I love from home into my new home. And I'm very proud of it. So that's what it means to us. Yeah. And actually, I just wanted to touch base on when you asked me about the North American wines, like why did I mention North American wine and changing the narrative? I think, that really is so important now because now we've identified a channel on how to solve this problem, which was we couldn't get Canadian wine into the US. So now that we've solved that, now there's this channel. I mean, we're going to change the narrative to North American wine because someone eventually is going to say in 5 years, oh yeah, I picked up some wine from BC. Oh, we're just talking about North American wines over here, not just isolating ourselves as a continent. I think now that the solution is there, I think that this is I see Kascadia being around in 10 years. I see it being around for a long time. The fact that we've, been able to build out this club now. We ship to 45 states. I mean, we've just grown. So anyway, just to answer that question, that is very important to me.
There is so much there. I mean, an entrepreneur finding a gap in the market, helping to fill the gap, and really your point about the lifestyle. Wine is so much more than just wine. I have this chat with almost everyone I connect with in the industry or wine enthusiasts. And wine, I mean, at its basic, I love just drinking wine, and I'm happy to not to chat about it, but it really is about everything around it. It is about a story, and it is about food, and it's about connecting with people. So you mentioned the process of becoming an entrepreneur. So can you share with us one or two challenges or curveballs which surprised you or which you weren't expecting when you started this whole process? And maybe pandemic aside, because I think, or if you want, maybe that's it, because that was a big curveball for so many people. And you were really launching this business during the COVID-19 pandemic. And then on the flip side, if you have any comment about any welcome surprises, which you didn't see coming or anticipate that, really added to the business or took you in a different direction, a very pleasant direction that you weren't expecting.
But biggest surprises aside from the pandemic, I would say, I really look at myself as really having worked on this business for 5 years. And the first 2 years was really about setting up your permits and licensing and doing market research. It was 3 years ago. My biggest shock was we found out we were having twins. And yeah, it sounds personal, but it does intervene in your career.
Well, it's part of your life.
It's part of your life. But what I was very committed to, and I always will be, is my children and my husband and my family comes first. But the great part of my company and the great, wonderful part of the pandemic was it allowed me to work from home. And I had support within my home, which was between my husband and I, and his parents were around. If I had to hop on a virtual tasting, I could. And the wonderful thing that happened during COVID as well was, and I didn't anticipate this, was the influx of sales. So it's great. It was a great thing that happened, but we ran out of inventory, and that was very difficult for me to bring it down when a border was closed. So, I think it also gave me room to pivot my business, which was our goal actually in the beginning was to carry wines from Oregon, Washington, and California at some point. I think this pushed me to pivot in that direction that year. Not only were we all sitting in our homes, but some of the biggest fires that have ever taken place along the West Coast happened that year. I just remember being in tears watching TV, and sometimes I would just shut it off and my heart would break for the wineries in Northern California or Washington or Oregon and BC. And so that was the year we pivoted, and we brought on a few producers from Oregon and California. So every entrepreneur, every business owner has to pivot. Sometimes disaster can strike and you're pushed in that direction. But I think at the end of the day, it was for good reason.
And so I guess this might goes into actually one of my next questions, which is, since you've started your business, you've started also a wine club now. You've just recently launched a wine club, and that's a new addition to your wheel of services and offerings. Where has the main growth been since you started your business? Is it, word of mouth, consumers based in certain states or Canadians? And where would you like to target your future growth to be in your business? It sounds as though part of it might be some unexpected growth and new new channels that you weren't expecting. But where would you like Kascadia to be in, let's say, 5 years in terms of who your base is, who your consumers are?
I would say the largest percentage of growth we've seen is in our direct to consumer portfolio. The trade is always there. Wholesale, we have wonderful wholesale clients. We've been able to work with some really amazing restaurants and retail shops. We kind of keep ourselves as a boutique distributor only because that hasn't been my focal point, but I obviously want to keep inventory available for wholesale clients because they're also important. It's just that I really wanted to build out our online portfolio, specifically because I think the reach is bigger. So the web can take you to 45 US states versus, putting all your time and energy into meeting with, clients just in California. It's just the reach was there. So I think that's still going to be very important. It's always going to be on where I'll invest a lot of my time. And that really helped us because we focused our energy there. That helped us launch the wine club. And I think because we're going to put our focus into the wine club, that'll help us grow. And, more people will be able to share their experiences and talk about Canadian wine.
So just on the wine club, for people who aren't familiar, and I suppose particularly people who are listening who are in the United States now. So your wine club is a curated, every so often you will announce a curated pack of wine that you've selected and bundle and deliver to people's doorsteps in many states. Is it offering in practical terms? That's the service?
Yeah. Absolutely. So we have curated 3 specific packs. The first one is called O Canada because it's all Canadian. It's 4 bottles of wine. The second one is the Kascadia 4-pack, which is 2 Canadian wines and 2 Pac West wines. And the third is Kascadia 6. So 3 Canadian and 3 Pac West. When I say Pac West, it could be from Oregon, Washington, or California. And it's just the best picks for the season, the best usually from the region. And I mean, I think folks say it to me quite often. They get on our website and they look at the brands we carry. We carry the creme de la creme, and for product and brands. And we offer 2 virtual tastings a year. We also offer a recipe card, and we ship every quarter, which the pack is really nice. It lets people digest the new wines, and we talk about it quite a bit. And we do have a founders club, which is our first group of I think it was 50 signups would be part of our annual book club. So in that, we gift that club member a book every year that they can enjoy. Our very first one was Perfect Parents from Evan Goldstein. And everybody loved it. And it's great because it's got all these recipes and it teaches you about wine. And the next year will be another book. And it's my personal gift to club members. Thank you for being the first 50, which I think we're almost full. So anyone else interested, hop on there. And it's just exciting because you get to be creative when you have a club.
Absolutely. And it's exciting that you have someone like Evan Goldstein who you're working with, to have such a highly regarded wine master and foodie and chef and writer, to have you working with him. That must be really, really exciting.
He's amazing. I mean, Evan's been a client for years, and we work on a couple projects together. But when I had to pick my first book, I was like, Evan, I'd be honored if I can give your book out for our very first offering. He's like, I'm honored. So we're great friends. We love working together. I think we do really great work together on the projects we've worked on. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that we do also have partnerships with wine touring companies in BC right now that are offering discounts to Kascadia Wine Club members. So that was another incentive for our Founders Club.
Fantastic. So if people want to find out more, then the best way is to go to your website, I assume, and they can find out how they can get wine depending on the state that they're in or where they'd like wine sent to, or to become members of your club and learn more about what you have on offer. So that would be the best thing. And obviously they can connect with you through the site, right?
That's correct. We currently ship to about 45 US states. So we cover quite a bit of ground, but you never know. So we do have a page on our website that says, I think, shipping, and you'll be able to see whether your state is on there or not.
We've talked about the why for your business, like why this started. Then there's the how, and we've talked a little bit about it. You grassroots, go to events, tastings, you've started it online, you've done your market research. In practical terms, what's involved for you? You can work mainly at home in California, and then you do trips to Canada. But, practically, what do you need to do to get the wine over the border? In really broad terms, I imagine it's a lot of paperwork and time and patience. And then you have other parties or wineries on the Canadian side of the border that you're working with to get the grapes across.
Right. Well, number one is sourcing. And the way I source is I'll attend the Vancouver International Wine Festival a couple times, in the 5-year span, and or networking. I think we've had a great experience word of mouth, just chatting with some of the wineries we work with. I'll sometimes ask a new producer if that we're introducing in our portfolio, is there anyone else that you would like to see in our portfolio with you? I think that really helps. And once we, and again, most wineries will reach out to us. So we have many wineries reaching out to us quite often, and we're still trying to work through the list of folks that have reached out. So sometimes it's an initial conversation with the winemaker or the proprietor, and me letting them know this is what's involved. And then we set up samples. First step for a winery that is interested in exporting into the US is they'll have to ship samples. And I work them through that process too, because that's also, there's some paperwork required for that. And then once we say, okay, these are the ones we're going to purchase, I work through the pricing strategy with wineries and make my suggestions on what we should do. And then when that's finalized, then we start the paperwork and we get everything documented, COLA label applications, the whole 9 yards. And I basically prepare them for success. And that's my goal. And that is something we offer via consulting now, because just the amount of work we started taking on, if we want to build out this business, it's going to take more than just myself. So I do have an impeccable team that I rely heavily on every day. Every Monday, we have our team meeting. We had ours today, and we've got our office coordinators. We've got our folks in distribution. We've got our folks who handle our marketing and PR. We have a solid team here, and I'm hoping to continue the consulting side so I can really start to build up the amount of wineries that are in our portfolio that want to be here.
Well, congratulations to be at the point where you're expanding your team. It is a lot of work, and also for being able to offer the consulting advice and assistance to wineries. Because as you know, so many of our wineries in British Columbia are very small, they're family run, and people are really focusing on the farming and making the wine. There isn't a lot of time at the end of the day to work on other initiatives. And like you've mentioned, there's so many steps that are involved, and you need chunks of time. And we all need a fresh brain, once in a while to work through these things. So, it's a great resource that you're making available to producers who are interested in investigating this path. To turn the focus back on where you are, this is more of a little bit of a rapid fire question. And this is probably very similar to someone asking me to give them some ideas of my favorite wineries to go to when they come to the Okanagan, which is really hard for me to answer without asking them more questions like, where have you been? What kind of wine do you like? Do you like rustic? Do you want to go fancy? So I can't just seem to give a very simple answer. However, here goes my question to you, VJ. If I was coming down to visit you, what are some of your must-do spots in your neighborhood for wine, or in your wine country? You're on the doorstep of a number of wine countries around you. Where would you send me? Where would you take me?
Well, I think most folks will go to Napa and or Sonoma. And there's also, I live in Los Gatos currently, and we also have many wineries in the Santa Cruz Mountain AVA, right? And so there's just so many wineries. I mean, there's a winery at Testarossa, about 7-minute drive from my home in the tasting room, and it's just amazing. It's really a beautiful place, and they've got amazing wines. They're kind of more Burgundian focused, which is really nice. Wonderful Pinot Noirs. You can get a light Pinot Noir to a deeper Pinot, like a bold Pinot Noir, in fact. And you can get a French oak Chardonnay, or you can get no oak. And so I think the variety is just so incredible out here. But I actually haven't been to Napa in a while, but we tend to frequent Sonoma, surprisingly. Sonoma downtown has a really incredible tasting room area. It almost feels like it's one block of just tasting rooms. And one of my favorite ones is Pangloss. And I think they're a little bit more Burgundian focused. I can't remember right now, but just incredible wines. And really you can really taste, the region, and it's the herbaceous red wines that I love that you kind of pick up there. And then I want to give a shout out, actually. This is funny, but there is a wine shop in Aptos, California called Deer Park Wine and Spirits. I can't make this up. They have the most amazing selection for industry folks. Yes. So if you work in the industry, and I'm pretty sure it has to do with this incredible buyer. I believe she worked as a winemaker at some point in the Santa Cruz Mountains. But everything you are looking for, whether it's international or local, is in that shop.
It sounds like an absolute mecca, and that I need to have that high on my list when I swing back to Northern California on my next visit.
It's so incredible because it's, you wouldn't think it, but when I walked in, and I think every once in a while when I'm in there, I'm inspired by some of the producers, and they focus on small production as well. And I think Tara Wine Company, I absolutely love her wines, woman-owned business. Tara's, California-based winemaker. And the first time I tried her wines, I'd heard about them, but I tried them there. Also, Two Shepherds, another local producer. Just really amazing stuff coming out of Santa Cruz Mountain region. So I am just such a big fan, and I can't say enough good things about it. So I wanted to mention.
There's something about mountain wine that's very, very compelling. So high altitude mountain wine. Sounds like you've mentioned a few from where you're around. We're near you, and we have some certainly here in British Columbia, Similkameen Valley, and Fort Barons and Lillooet. So something very intriguing about mountain wine. Well, VJ, there will be so much for us to taste when I swing by Northern California next time. And no doubt we'll be able to clink glasses again on one of your trips back up to British Columbia sometime soon. In the meantime, I'd like to thank you for joining me today, and also for being such an enthusiastic proponent, not only of British Columbian and Canadian wines, but also for taking hold of the reins of this adventure called life with such great humor and enthusiasm and aplomb. I really enjoy spending time with you and swapping notes about the industry. So thanks so much for sharing the good word about British Columbia wines south of our border. And I really look forward to seeing you again sometime up this way.
Looking forward to it as always, Tania. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining. So just as a little interlude here, it seemed to me when listening back on this recording that VJ and I didn't actually spell out the name of her website. So this short little break is to let you know that the website for accessing VJ's company and services is Kascadia Wine Merchants. That's all one word.com. And Kascadia is with a K. Thanks so much for listening to today's show. If you'd like to hear more discussion around the topic of why you don't see many Canadian wines in America or other global wine regions, you can tune into Cheftimony Podcast discussion, where I go through this topic in more detail. Check out episode 54 of Cheftimony. It's called Line Cook Thoughts, and it's an interview with Ray DeLucia, a graduate of the Culinary Institute of America who advocates for line cooks and food industry workers. I have a sidebar chat in that episode with host Graham McLennan. I also mentioned Kascadia Wine Merchants, and we talk about why Americans don't see Canadian wines in U.S. shops or restaurant wine lists. But if you'd like to listen to my future TT Wine Explorer podcasts, you can follow me on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. I'd be thrilled if you join me for the ride. Until then, keep tasting, learning, and living.